All right. Well, I'll just pray real quick, and then Dylan will make his way back. Father, thank you so much. So we're able to still gather together and hopefully have a wonderful day together as the body. Be with us in our time of study. I thank you for all that I've been able to learn, and I pray that I'm able to help others not find this as intimidating, to understand that this is a book of hope, such a great book of hope, and there's a lot of mystery in there, but also a lot that reminds us that you are in control, that you are sovereign over everything, and that we're on your team. We have nothing to fear. Praise in Jesus' name, amen. Alrighty, so last week we talked. Were you here last week? I can't remember. Okay, so we talked about the seals of the book, covered 6 of the 7, and it's like, okay, after the 6 seals, we get like this long break in chapter 7. And this is, I'll admit, this is one of those things where I never, growing up, it was always one of those questions of like, what are the 144,000? What is that? Is it weird? Is it as weird as people say it's weird, or is it not? So it was actually really, honestly, this whole class has just been an exercise in me being like, all right, let me finally figure out what the heck I think about this book. So I need to figure that out. And some of these things have been, we've knocked out some of those already. It's like, all right, cool. We talked about the horsemen and why that kind of makes sense in the book. And now we can talk about the 144,000. And I've always had a number of answers about who they are that have seemed maybe a little flimsy or maybe a little bit out there in some cases. But I think after studying it well enough, it does make a lot more sense. So hopefully it will for us here today too. So last week when we did the seals, we had all these judgments, which one of the books that I'm reading is challenging its readers to not even think about it as much as judgments, but more in this idea of kind of this chance or opportunity to repent. I forget the word they used, but it was judgments or something. But as we'll see later on, even with the other, the bowls or the trumpets and such, we don't even necessarily have to think about them as judgments per se, but also maybe in addition to that or in lieu of that, this idea of people have an opportunity to look at these wondrous works and to see what God is actually doing. I can imagine, gosh, at that point it was Christianized, but when all these great empires, when Rome or when all of these great empires eventually fall, there's got to be so much relief to those that were oppressed, and maybe this even belief of there is hope in this world, and maybe even this turning to God, and I think we'll see that later on in Revelation. But like I said, last week we had the 6 seals, and they asked us a great important question: Who is able to stand? They say the wrath of the Lamb, from him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? And we get that answer in this chapter. So let's go ahead and read Revelation 7. After this I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, so that no wind would blow on the earth or on the sea or on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun, holding the seal of the living God, and called out with a loud voice to the 4 angels, to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants of our God on their forehead. That'll be important, forehead. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000, sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. From the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. From the tribe of Reuben, 12,000. From the 12 of Gad, 12,000. From the tribe of Asher, 12,000. From the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000. From the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000. From the tribe of Simeon, 12,000. From the tribe of Levi, 12,000. From the tribe of Issachar, 12,000. From the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000. From the tribe of Joseph, 12,000. And from the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation and all the tribes, people, languages, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, clothed in the white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. Sorry, notification here. Come on. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, "Amen. Blessing, glory, wisdom, thanksgiving, honor, power, and might belong to our God forever and ever. Amen." Then one of the elders responded, saying to me, "These who are clothed in the white robes, who are they, and what have they, and where have they come from?" And I said to him, "My Lord, you know." And he said to me, "These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will spread his tabernacle over them. They will no longer hunger, nor thirst, nor will the sun beat down on them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb in the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and will guide them to springs of water of life, and God will wipe every tear from their eyes." Amen. Okay. Oh, so I never realized the little light bulb just looks very red, which makes sense for my background. All right. So this should be a fun discussion. I'm curious. You guys may already have the answer, and something I never did for myself. But what do you all think the 144,000 and or what have you heard are the 144,000 in your lives in the church here, or even out? Have y'all heard any? Haven't heard anything about any theories or ideas? Dylan, you can blame it on someone else. Like, well, this my buddy believes, not me, but my buddy.
The main, I think the most talked about theory is that it's literal.
Literal.
That it's a literal 144,000 exactly.
The most talked about is that.
I think that's the most talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with it, but I don't have solid footing to talk about other than it's like, well, it's in Revelations, and you can't just say it's literal.
Yeah.
So that is my rebuttal to it's an exact number.
Sure. Yeah, you're right. It's in Revelation, and you could really make a good argument that pretty much any number in Revelation, you got to look a little side-eyed of like, am I supposed to take you fully literally? Yeah. Like, I'm willing to believe the 7 churches are literal, but even there, like there's. Oh, actually, we talked about this. Like, yes, there were 7 churches, and that we know about. We also know there are so many other churches. There might have been 10 that received this letter, but John may have just been like, I'm going to stop at 7. Oh, because this will fit really well in my theme here. So even that number, yeah, there are 7 churches, but he just, it seems like he decided to stop there, I would assume. So, yeah, exactly. So you're right. There have been many popular talking points about how there are literal 144,000. We'll cover some of the historical interpretations of this chapter as well as current interpretations. But yeah, let's discuss the first 3 verses before we go in depth of the 144,000. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, so that no wind would blow on the earth or on the sea or on a tree. I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun, holding the seal of the living God. And he called out with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, "Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants of our God on their forehead." So if you remember from last week, we had the 4 horsemen that were seemingly commissioned by God to bring sorrows and calamities on the earth. However, here it seems that they are being held back until God's servants are sealed on their foreheads. I talked about the foreheads being important, partly because I want to point that out, because as later on we'll see, when we talk about the mark of the beast, we see that being done on the forehead and the forearm, and I think it's the wrist or a forearm or something like that as well. And we've already talked about these contrasting images in Revelation. You have this mark of those who are sealed, and then you have this mark of the beast. And is there anybody that's unmarked? I mean, you could try to say that, but to me it seems unlikely. You're either on one side or the other. So I think these are contrasting images when you see the way that they're described, marked on the forehead. And there's other Old Testament stuff in there as well. We'll get into that some other time. But I wanted to point that out. Also, the idea of the four winds is commonly used in the Bible to speak of the whole world. I hear people talk about numerology and how four is this number of like the whole earth, and you do see that associated often with it. I'm not going to push it too far, but in this case, it seems pretty clear. Four winds, man. Even we use it so many times in the Bible. Even Jesus in Matthew 24 says, "And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet blast, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other." I think it's talking about something else entirely, but still, this idea, imagery of the four corners going on here. Let's see. Yeah, I'm showing you it again to show you where it says, holding back the four winds, and then underline the four angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth. The four horsemen were modeled from Zechariah 6, as we talked about last week. And we see these horsemen are also being called winds or spirits in Zechariah 6. The angel replied to me, "These are the four spirits of heaven, who go out after taking their stand before the Lord of all the earth," talking about the four horses that they had just seen. And a reminder that the Hebrew word for spirit is also used for wind or breath. So you can see that why they might have been called that in Revelation, called the winds of the earth. The main point here is that before calamities fall on the earth or on the sea or on any tree, there will be a sealing of God's people. And of course, it leads us to the very important question, not who are the 144,000, but what does it mean to be sealed, actually? That's something that might not be super intuitive to think about, because obviously that's a good thing. But it really makes you wonder to what extent this goes. And I'm actually still wrestling with this question. If I'm being honest, we could talk about being some level of protection, but is it protection from the attacks of the world? Is it protection from God's wrath, his physical wrath? Is it protection from losing your faith? Because that's really the big point of Revelation, is to remain a faithful witness, just as Jesus was a faithful witness. So something to wrestle with. I think at the moment I'm kind of steered toward this idea of definitely the spiritual element of being sealed from losing your faith, so to speak, from being able to continue to be a faithful witness. But also, I could see this idea of when the wrath of God does come in some ways, shapes, or form, that there would be some level of protection. When Rome eventually falls, when this emperor dies, or when someone else comes and overcomes, it seems like everyone's going to be affected by that. When Jerusalem was falling, Jesus, when Jesus warned in the Gospels that whenever people would see these things, that they should run away because Jerusalem's going to fall. But there was still some physical harm to Christians even during these times. So that's why I'm not willing to say all these judgments that we can see as God's judgment coming down. I'm not willing to say that all Christians are completely protected off from that. We'll talk about the Exodus later and how maybe there is that image there as well. But I just want to throw it out there. What does the sealing of God's people do? Because I would say it's not exactly straightforward. And again, we've talked about this being a book of hope for the first century Christians. As an oppressed people, you're excited to hear that God is going to be acting in this world. Yet, you have just heard that the kings of the earth and the eminent people and the commanders and the wealthy and the strong, but also every slave and free person hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. So everyone is still kind of somewhat in this calamity. These things, literal or not, the mountains coming down, are going to happen to all people. Thankfully, you hear that God's people will be sealed. And as I already kind of talked about, what that means, definitely something to at least consider or meditate on. Here it is worth looking at different views. If you believe that this is all going to, and this is what I'm talking about, the different views, futurist view or preterist or etc. If you believe that this is all going to happen in the future, which is not my view, then it might be reasonable to believe that there would be a literal protection from any physical harm, including economic or life-threatening. So if you believe in this rapture view, then you're thinking, these 144,000, which some people think that they're going to be some Jews at the end of time that will turn to Jesus, and they're going to be physically protect from all this harm. Again, I don't, definitely not my view there. But this is where one way you might interpret that. So if you run across someone believing this, then that might be their line of reasoning. I talked about the Exodus story. You remember the story with the 10 plagues, and in there, God's people, for many of the plagues, especially at least the protection from the oldest son, they were protected from those physical calamities. So I can't give too much grief saying that this is completely out of left field. Why would God take? No, He's done that. He's worked in that way before, and we're actually about to talk about the Exodus story next week. So there's an element to that, and I want to acknowledge it, but I still think that's kind of the wrong direction to go. But a different view would say if these events are more relevant to the first century Christians, then we know that they are still suffering harm in many ways. That's kind of what I talked about. There's still this harm that's happening when Rome eventually is collapsing, and economic harm is coming in any nation that becomes a Babylon or Rome or whatever. Then Christians still suffer. When the economy is down in the U.S., if it happens to be that it's a judgment from God, Christians aren't necessarily immune in that way, but it's our faith that remains strong. Even when we see all these calamities, if you will, happen around us, there is still this element of protection. I'm not saying that this is directly what it's talking about for us today, but I'm saying that we can take those, I would say we would take those principles for us as well. And that could have been happening for these first century Christians as well. So in my mind, there are two options. You could say that Christians were still suffering from the world's attacks, but would be safe from God's divine attacks. I'm less inclined to believe that one, but I think it's reasonable to hold that. Or more likely, in my opinion, God's people are being sealed so that they are now empowered to be faithful witnesses and to not fall away. That they're sealed when they see all these, metaphorical mountains falling down on us, or calling on them to fall on us because of all these calamities that are going on here. So that's where I'm leaning. Maybe you can mix a little and say, yeah, God will protect people in some capacity, maybe not from everything, but God is protecting in some ways. But that is some difficulty in interpretation there. The reason I believe that the sealing is more spiritual in nature is because we have read that the sixth seal is a calamity that will fall on all people. So remember, every slave and free person. All right, before we move on, I want to point something out. This sealing is done on the bondservants of God on their foreheads. This is likely a contrast we will find later with those who bear the mark of the beast. Revelation 14, which says, "Then another angel, a third one, followed them, saying with a loud voice, 'If anyone worships the beast of his image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand,'" okay, it was hand. There's these things of how they can or can't do, etc. But I do think this is a contrast. So we're supposed to be seeing which team are we on. These 7 churches are supposed to be thinking, which team are you guys going to be on when there is this, when God comes and acts in this place. All right. Yeah.
It's a historical question. Are you aware of any literal sense of that kind of thing happening historically, where owners would put a mark on their slave or anything like that? I know, like with cattle.
Yeah. Totally.
But I'm curious if you know of anything happening with people in that regard. I know that for some slaves, you can pierce my ear to the door, kind of thing.
Yeah.
We have songs about that, but I'm curious if you know.
Nothing that I would tie directly to this. Like if there's any evidence of this some marking literally happening, people in this time, not like this. I don't think we're, or not that I would tie here. So. No, yeah, it's totally fair. I think it's the other thing, because when you're talking about this sealing taking place and marks on the foreheads, in this very exaggerated view, people are like, "Oh, you're gonna have the exaggerated view is like you're gonna have the microchip on your wrist or on your forehead, or you can have this symbol and whatever down the centuries people have thought that they're going to be branded or whatever." But if you're inclined to believe this is a literal thing, you must believe that there will be a literal. Then maybe you should be inclined to believe that there is a literal mark for Christians as well, just it's a seal instead of a mark of the beast. It's a seal of God.
The seal illustration is
Yeah.
Like all that kind of stuff makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
To keep stuff out and keep stuff in. But yeah, I was curious on the mark historically.
Oh yeah, I would. And if I read more preterist material, and they're the ones that believe that it's talking about Jerusalem falling in AD 70, they might make connections. I wouldn't be surprised, but if I ever find something, I'll let you know. 'Cause that is a good question, actually. All right, let's look at verses 4 through 8. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000. I'm not going to read all that again. But all these, 12,000 for each tribe. Let's go with that. Except it's not each tribe. Again, I'm taking an idealist approach in my class. So I will comment on some historical views associated with the futurist position. The futurist position believes that most of Revelation has not yet occurred. Because of this, there are specific views, not every futurist view, but specific views on the 44,000 that have been allowed to exist. Some groups, Davidians or Jehovah's Witnesses, have at some point, maybe adjusted their views at this point, believed that 144,000 believers must gather before Christ comes. Though they have not believed that the gathered need to be direct descendants of the 12 tribes. So there have been groups that try to either try to gather or that are thinking, when our number reaches 144,000. So they're willing to take the 144,000 number literal, but they're not willing to make it literal that they themselves have to be Jews, because then I can't be a part of that. So that's the problem, right? Other futurist views have believed that 144,000 ethnic Jews will convert to Christianity during a time of great tribulation. So in the future, there's this 7 or 3.5 years or whatever, and that there will be they're converted. Personally, I do not believe that complete literalism is necessary here for a number of reasons. Revelation itself uses symbolic numbers that cannot make sense of reason. Later on, we'll see that the measurements of the New Jerusalem cannot match the measurements of the wall. So numbers force us to find symbolism in the vision. So Revelation 21 says, a city was laid as a square, and it's saying the width and the length and width and height are all equal at, what does it call it? It says 12,000 stadia in length, which is a lot. But then it says when it measures the wall, it's 144 cubits. If I remember that, cubits like the length of a forearm. So by human measurements, which are also the same of the angelic measurement. So either the wall is very inadequate. It's like this tiny thing compared to this giant city of how it is, and it's a pretty useless wall. Or we're supposed to find symbolism in that, because otherwise we can't. In a literal sense, you're like, what's the point of this wall? It makes no sense. Well, we're missing the point. We're supposed to look at the numbers and what that number is trying to say. So I will tell you what I believe of the 144,000 first. Then I will give you the reasoning that I have found. And I'll wait for, maybe I'll wait. I'll repeat it when Dylan gets here. But first, let's keep reading before we get to that. Revelation 7:9. After these I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes, people, languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. Clothed in white robes and palm branches were in their hands. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. So we have two groups here, right? We have the sealed 144,000, and then we have a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes, peoples, and languages. And I believe that we only have one group here. These aren't, I don't think these are supposed to be thought of as two groups. I think you're supposed to say there is actually just one group here. The 144,000 are symbolically God's people from, why did I do form twice in a row? From every nation and all the tribes. I'll lay out a number of reasons for that, though they will not. I won't list them in the order of most convincing, the most convincing order, but I'm just going to lay out a few reasons why I think that this is. First is we have our symbolic tool of hearing and seeing again that we talked about a couple weeks ago. Remember in chapter 5 when we had this contrast where he said, one of the elders said to me, this is John, so John is hearing from an elder, stop weeping, behold the lion from the tribe of Judah, he's overcome, he's able to come. So he hears this from the elder. And then John turns and he looks and he sees not a lion, but he sees a lamb standing as if slaughtered. So we see, and it may not be the most obvious thing, but it's interesting that John's hearing this from an elder that the lion is here, and turning, instead of seeing the lion that the elder told him, it's literally with his vision, he sees the lamb. And now we know those two things are one and the same in many metaphorical sense. But John's using this to kind of convey almost the strangeness of this message. So when we have in Revelation 7:4, look, we see that happen again. Verse 4, and I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000. First off, how do you hear that there's 144,000? I don't know. Like counting footsteps, 144,000. I heard that there. But again, that's the beauty of the symbolism. I heard the 144,000. They're from every tribe, and there's 12,000 from each. All the tribes are there, all of them. But then after I looked, and behold, there was a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation, all tribes, people, language, before the throne. Not just these Jews, not just these 12 tribes that are reunited, which aren't even all of the 12 tribes. But I heard this. But the flip is when I look and see, it's all of God's people. That's symbolically, it's what all it is. It's all of God's people that are present here. And I think that's, if it happens once, it's like, okay, that's a little weird, but sure. But when it happens, this tool happens twice of this hearing and seeing. I think that's significant. We have that similar dynamic here. There is truth in both visions of where you see and what you hear. There's truth to be found in both of them, but I think we're meant to see that they are one and the same. The lion is the lamb. The 144,000 is symbolic for all of God's people that are here. We see the bigger picture with the part that John sees. Second reason, the numeral symbology is really striking here. We see that there are 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. So again, 12 tribes, that's all of God's people. Which is funny that in the Old Testament it talks about the 12 tribes, even though there's more than that. There's the tribe of Levi, which we don't count, but we're still saying, when we say the 12 tribes, we're talking about all of Israel. We're sticking with that number 12 because of this significance of completeness. Not even all the tribes are used. We're actually missing Dan and Ephraim, but somehow we include Joseph in there. You remember Joseph, he's not included in one of the 12 tribes, but it's just split into, because two of his sons are kind of given that place, so to speak. And Levi is then left out because they're at least in most of the counting orders. So, by the way, that's interesting. We can get a lot into that. But John's like, or John or Jesus, however you want to say this, it's like, we're going to toss out Dan because we need to keep our number 12 because that's our symbol there of completeness. The purpose is to symbolically say all of God's people. Also, 1,000 was the biggest number in the Hebrew language. So if you want to say like a million, you'd say 1,000 or something like that. So symbolically, using 1,000, it's like you're saying there's a million people, or there's whatever you want to say is like the most people there there could be. It's like saying that I've got a million things to do. Like I've got all the things to do here. So you could really see that symbolically with the numbers. The message is that all of God's people will be sealed. Third reason, the literal 144,000 does not make sense. Of course, God can choose to do whatever He wishes to do. Who am I to tell God how to God? But a literal 104,000 sealed believers seems, first off, it seems odd. That's very specific. Again, God can do as He wishes, but we also seem to come across these 144,000 later in Revelation, and we're given more details about them. We're told that, and they sang a new song before the throne, yada yada. And no one was able to learn the song except the 144,000 who had been purchased from the earth. These are the living ones who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are celibate, and they are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever He goes. So it seems that these 144,000, the sealed ones, they're only going to be male virgins. Again, that's what I'm saying. The literal 144,000 doesn't make sense. If it's this view that later on it's going to be in the future, these are going to be Jewish converts. Well, sorry, I guess no Jewish women are going to convert to the faith. And it's only going to be virgins that are going to be converting to the faith in that case. People have tried to say that these are different groups, but it really, in my opinion, that doesn't really make sense to say. The only people who are said to be sealed in Revelation 7 are the 144,000. Again, no women and no married men. So the symbolic approach seems more reasonable in my opinion. Fourth reason is this image of those who are purchased. The 144,000 are said to be purchased just like the great multitude. I recognize that these could be separate groups, the first 144,000 and the second, but I think if we're seeing them again, we're supposed to think that they're probably the same group here. It's striking the similar language that's being used to describe them. In Revelation 14:4, in Revelation 5:9, when we talk about the 144,000, it says, "And these have been purchased from mankind." Back in Revelation chapter 5, when we see why the Lamb is worthy, it says, "They sang a new song saying, 'Worthy are you to take the scroll and to break its seals. For you were slaughtered and you purchased people for God with your blood from every tribe, language, people, and nation.'" Oh, we just heard about that. So the ones that were purchased, the 144,000 in Revelation 14, there's also another purchased people, might be the same, in Revelation 5. But those that are purchased in Revelation 5 are from every tribe, language, people, and nation, which we just saw about the great multitude. So, it's Revelation 7:9, we just see that. Every nation, tribes, people. This is the great multitude which no one could count. Do you see that the 144,000 are described as purchased? These connections we're talking about here. I'm out of time and I have a lot of slides, so I'm probably cut this off short. But I will say that I should just at least put this out there. One of my favorite Revelation sources I've been using disagrees with this fact that there's only one group. So I'll say that there's room for other interpretations, but most of the sources I have would agree that these are the same people. It's not easy to be sure on all of these interpretations, but I do want to keep that out there. So I'm going to go over these slides next week since I'm out of time here, but just for my good buddy Dylan's sake, because I don't want to leave you in suspense, my argument is that the 144,000 are the same as what we read just 3 verses later in the great multitude that cannot be counted from every nation, tribe, language, etc. The reason I lay out is, I think you were here for that. We talked about hearing and seeing. Remember in Revelation 5 where it said, where an elder told John, John's crying and the elder told him, "Don't worry, the lion from the tribe of Judah is coming." So he hears that the lion's coming, and then when he looks up, he actually sees the lamb. There's truth in both of that, but there's this contrast. So in Revelation, somehow he heard about 144,000. I said, I don't know if you're hearing all the footsteps of 144,000, but he hears the 144,000. But then when he looks up in verse 9, and he looks and beholds, there's a great multitude that no one could count from every tribe and nation. So that was my first reason. Next one was all the numbers, 12,000 from the 12 tribes. And not even all the tribes are used. We skip over Dan and Ephraim because it seems that John's trying to say, I need to keep this to 12 because that's our number of completeness. I've talked about before how 1,000 is the biggest number in Hebrew. So if you want to say a million, you say 1,000. So I would say it's symbolically representing all of God's people by saying 1,000. 12 and 12, the 12 tribes and 1,000 there. That's my reasoning there. The other is, my third reason is that a literal 144,000 doesn't make sense. We actually hear about the 144,000 again in Revelation 14. Some people think they're different groups. I don't think I think if you've heard about them once and you hear about them again, you're probably thinking these are the same groups. But when it tells about those 144,000, they're told that who have not defiled themselves with women and they are celibate. So if you think that these 144,000 are going to be from the future, you're thinking they're only going to be men, so no women that are going to turn to Jesus in the future, and you think they're going to be no married men. There's also not going to be no married men because they need to be celibate. It seems like we need to take more symbolic approach than this literal approach, because even if you don't think that's in the future, even in this moment, that, to my head, it doesn't make sense. God can do as he wishes, of course, but I don't think it makes sense to believe these 104,000 are going to be virgin men only here. The other is, there's this idea of those who are purchased. The 144,000, when you see them later on, they're said to be purchased just like the great multitude. Revelation 14, They haven't defiled themselves with women. They're celibate. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes, and they have been purchased from mankind. Just like we see that when people told Jesus back in chapter 5 that he's worthy to break the scroll, because you were slaughtered and you purchased people for God with your blood from every tribe, language, and people. Except that language, again, of tribe, language, people, and nation, that's where we read about the great multitude. So we have the two groups, 144,000 and the great multitude. So it really seems that you could say that there's talking about different groups that are being purchased, but it makes more sense. But you can see that connection of the 144,000 were purchased, just like those that were from every tribe, language, nation. And maybe you can kind of make that connection there. So that's my pitch for why I think that these are meant to be the same group, just symbolically speaking. This idea of hearing and seeing, trying to make sense of male versions and stuff, but that makes the most sense to me, especially. Again, I did say that one of my favorite resources in Revelation has disagreed with me, but most of the sources I have will talk about that these are probably the same groups you're going with here, just in symbolic form. What are you expecting? You're thinking about the Jews and how the 100 people from every tribe are going to be gathered and God's people will be brought together. Yes, they will. But also, I have it at the end of my slide, and I'll finish with this, but I didn't put it in. We've already seen that there is this language in Revelation, back to the church in Philadelphia, those who say they are Jews but are not. And this isn't something to go against the Jews, but it's against something that those that don't believe in Jesus, including the Jews. So there are Jewish Christians among the churches, and they're part of that great multitude that can be counted. So when you're expecting God's people, God's sealed, when the other people, other Jews, non-Christian Jews in the synagogues are telling you that you don't belong here, and they're saying God's people are going to be the Jews. Well, John's saying, yes, I'm hearing about the 144,000 Jews here, but let me tell you what God's true Israel looks like. It looks like people from every tribe, nation that have been purchased by God. Anyways, that's my case. Talk to me about it afterwards if you disagree. But I think with that, we'll finish. Any questions? I went fast just for you on that one, but hopefully at least made my position a little more clear. So if we have nothing else, I think we will be dismissed. Thanks.